RealAgriculture.com's presentation of Unlocking Innovation, a national call to action, is brought to you by Bioenterprise Canada. Welcome to episode 2 of Unlocking Innovation, brought to you by Bioenterprise Canada. I'm Shaun Haney of Real Agriculture. In episode 1, we set the stage on Canada's agri-food innovation landscape. Today, we're going to go straight to the field. We're going to hear from post-secondary academics and producer groups about the real barriers that farmers face. Canada has the appetite for innovation, but they're rather fragmented. Funding doesn't always match the realities of agriculture, and compared to other countries, we fall behind in moving ideas from research to real-world adoption. Still, across our diverse regions, there are common threads, and that's where the opportunity lies. The report we're exploring points to 4 big needs: stronger collaboration and connectivity, streamlined regulation, better resources for entrepreneurs, and more coordinated funding. And above all, we need to treat agri-food as a national priority if Canada wants to compete globally. To dig into these challenges, I'm joined by Todd Ormann from Olds College, Kevin Peters from Keystone Agricultural Producers, and Dave Smardon from Bioenterprise. This is Unlocking Innovation, Episode 2, brought to you by Bioenterprise Canada. Okay, let's meet our panel. Up first, we got Todd Ormann from Olds College. Hey, Todd, how are you doing?
Good, thank you, Shaun.
So, Todd, talk about your role at Olds College and what Olds does.
Yeah, sure. I'm the Vice President of External Relations and Research here at Olds College. So I manage the teams that kind of reach out to various stakeholders, partners, donors, industry stakeholders. And then I manage the research teams, and I also have the farm. So I get to wear my farmer hat once again. And I have it's just not my tax return, Shaun, that says I'm a farmer now. Yeah, there you go.
I like it. You can only get to talk about it and facilitate some of the education, but also live it as well. I like that. Also joining us just outside of Steinbach, Manitoba, it is Kevin Peters. Kevin, how are we doing?
Well, yeah, thank you.
Hey, so talk about your farm and also your involvement with CAP.
Yeah, so I farm together with my family. We've got about 7,000 acres of cropland we farm, and also have a few hog ventures as well. My involvement in CAP is, I guess, newly minted vice president this year, and so sort of falling into my new role, learning a lot as we go here.
Yeah, well, congratulations on that. I like that. That's
Thank you.
good. Good to see you step up. And of course, also joining us here, no stranger to this series, it is Dave Smardon, who is the CEO of Bioenterprise. Dave, quickly introduce yourself.
Sure. Thanks. Thanks, Shaun. So I'm Dave Smardon, President and CEO of Bioenterprise Canada. We are a business accelerator or innovation accelerator focusing on the agriculture sector. We are national in scope. We're located in the middle of Canada in Guelph, Ontario. And we've been around doing this, it seems like forever, but since 2004.
Yeah, great stuff. Well, today what we're going to do is we're going to, in episode 1, Dave and I had kind of looked at the broader issue here, what we heard in the roundtables, why the roundtables happened in the first place. But, today what we're going to do is look at innovation on the ground, appetite versus access, and really dig into this. So I appreciate everybody tuning in. So, Kevin, let's start with you. In your mind, what's the biggest disconnect between the innovations that are being developed and some of the needs that farmers are actually trying to solve today? Do they always meet, or are there some disconnects?
I think a lot of times we do meet. I think, in my opinion, it takes a lot of time sometimes for those innovations to really get refined to where they really benefit right down on the ground level. It takes a while for sometimes, I think, some of the research and ideas to actually hit broad acre farms as opposed to small farms or special farms. So sometimes it's turning those ideas into reliable tech in the future. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you've got a cropping operation and livestock? Do you see are both similar, or do you see livestock being different?
Livestock as much more in some ways simpler because it's contained. Like in a hog operation, it really is the same on the East Coast as it would be in Alberta or Manitoba. Like, your environment is controlled, I guess. Versus cropping, which we all know it can vary mile to mile, let alone across a country. So there's a lot of variability in broadacre farming.
Yeah, well put. So, Todd, how can applied research like colleges, that Olds is built upon, how can they play a stronger role in translating some of these promising innovations from innovation that's maybe in a lab or someone's garage and bringing that to the field? How do you see that happening?
Yeah, so applied research by definition is supposed to be more around economic development than I would say discovery, right? So just to let you know where it kind of fits, it doesn't fit at that really early stage of like, TRL 1 and 2 and 3. It's more that 5 to 9. So the intent of applied research is to validate and test and disseminate information. Like, and so the thing about Olds College is like we have about 3,200 acres of farmland, right? 110 head of cattle and 1,000 head feedlot. And so we have fields that are a normal size field. We use equipment that are the same equipment that the farmer and ranchers use. And because of partners, we're using the most modern things that we're looking at. So we're a safe environment where you can bring things that are maybe just not quite yet market ready and test and validate them before they go to the farm. And then our role is to transition that to a farm. So that's where we play, right? And I think that that's a really important step is to make sure, because a lot of these things will come out from a tech perspective that may not really understand what that uniqueness is to the market. As Kevin indicated, there's lots of variability in some of those broad acres. Our role is to test it, and it can screw up on our farm, but hopefully not Kevin's. Let's put it that way.
And is it a challenge for all of that to happen at the speed that farmers want, or is the speed of these new innovations coming to the marketplace that you're running through your program, are they faster than what farmers want, or they match quite well?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Probably depends on the tech.
Well, it depends on the tech, and it also depends upon the company you're talking about too. Like I find with the large companies, they have very unique and distinguished processes developed over years. I mean, by the time they hit Kevin's farm, they've been cooked, right? And it's more about market development than product development. Smaller companies don't have those same level of resources or necessarily the knowledge of how the farm works. So at times, ag is ag. Like, it is Kevin will have like probably 40 cycles. And that's not really a lot in business, right? But that's 40 years of farming. And so at minimum, I think you need 3 to 4 years of those later stages just to test something out. And so what I think we need, honestly, is a very robust pipeline and recognize it takes a little bit longer for some of these technologies to go and not be afraid that it's going to fail, but let it fail in the right spot. And I don't think we think a lot about that in that methodology. So it is what it is, Shaun. We're an ag.
Yeah.
It's going to take, it's a cycle, and it is a longer cycle, but we still have to do the proper validation. And, a seed variety takes 9 years to come to market. An active ingredient in chemistry can be 10 to 15 years in the making. So it is longer cycles, but we just need a robust enough pipeline that we're continually bringing things in so the farmer doesn't see that they're left hanging. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, Dave, during the roundtables, we talked a lot about that pipeline and trying to make sure it's full to capacity as much as possible at the different stages, because this isn't just like startup to commercialization. There's a continuum here. What are some of the things that we heard from the roundtables that we can do in Canada to really, I guess, speed up that handoff to the farmer and increase some of the adoption? Oh, Dave, you're muted.
Sorry, it's a big conundrum, but the first issue is that we have a disconnect across the country. So, do the people in British Columbia necessarily know about what's available in Quebec or in Ontario and so on? Todd's talking about Olds College. How many Olds Colleges are there that can do what Olds College does across the country? And the answer is, I know of one, right? It's Olds College. So the idea of having an entrepreneur or someone with a really interesting innovation come into that ecosystem and start to get help. But they need help all along the way. As Todd and Kevin have both highlighted, it takes a long time for these innovations to get to the marketplace and get fully tested and be the risk be mitigated, properly mitigated. So that usually involves multiple organizations working with these companies, and the handoff is not there. So that's issue number one is, if I'm in New Brunswick or in British Columbia, how do I get to Olds College and know that Olds College can help me out? How do I get to the farmers that Kevin represents there and say, I need 4 farmers that I can work with to help with this innovation? Those are the connections that are not there, and those are the easiest things to solve right now.
Yeah.
Is to put those connections in place.
Well, and Kevin, I'm just assuming here, based on, your farm and how dynamic it is and all the different stuff, your guys' reputation, you got a lot of tech coming your way. People, somebody trying to get you to adopt something on the farm. It's got to create some skepticism, like, hey, is this actually proven? Where else is this implemented? I can only imagine some of the stuff that crosses your desk.
It is. It's intimidating actually at times, but at the same time, you pick and choose what fits and what suits and what may obviously be a benefit, because a lot of times you can get lots of ideas and great things thrown at you, but in the end, if it's not going to provide an ROI, or you can't make it pay, or it's not helping make a decision on your farm, it may not really be that effective. And I think that's possibly some of that challenge with a lot of technology. A lot of people see it as it's really neat and really cool, but what is it? What is the benefit in the end? And how can I take it to my farm and utilize it and make it make sense?
Yeah. How does it impact the ROI? Whether that's allows me to generate more revenue or frees up more time that leads to being able to work on more revenue generating opportunities, whatever that is, it gets back to that ROI component, right?
Exactly. No, you're absolutely right. And what Olds College is doing and various, there are lots of testing farms and little proving places. For us here where we are in Manitoba, we're really close to the US, like only an hour away. So we look in the Red River Valley, we look south to seeing what they're doing in the US too, for a lot of research and stuff. So,
yep. Dave?
Yeah. Kevin, I'm just curious. When one of the things that came out of the roundtables across the country was, with the vast amount of innovation that is being developed from the universities all the way through to small to medium-sized companies, how do farmers get connected to that innovation? Do they know what's going on? Are they in tune with that innovation so that they know what they can pick and choose from? And what role would the processing organization, the associations, have to play in that process?
That's a great question. Yeah, I don't know that our association as Keystone Ag producers would necessarily be able to host something like that. But at the same time, I think we're the type of place where we could get people in contact with the right person to find the resource for whatever innovation you're looking for. It's an interesting thing, though. Exactly how do you find out the technologies and how do you hear about them? Or, is it social media? Is it just a video you saw on YouTube? Is it talking to your neighbor? Like there's a million ways, and it as much as there's so many ways, it almost makes it more complicated to find the right way.
Yeah. Well, and Todd, Dave alluded to this word of fragmentation. Yeah. It's one thing we saw across the country. You participated at the Alberta Roundtable, and then you were at the national one as well. And every place that we went, Canada is like 11 countries. There is a lot of fragmentation. From your viewpoint there at Olds College, is there a practical way to fix that issue?
I don't know if there's a practical, but you're right. I think I Googled it because some other people are talking about, I think there's like 300 grower associations, right? Farm associations in Canada. And you think about that, we're now like on the farm is about 1.4 to 1.7% of the population. They say, 196,000 farms, but, I think if you look at Kevin's farm, there's probably maybe 20,000. So even though we have less and less farms, we still have a methodology from a grower representative perspective that's very fragmented, right? I went to Ireland here a couple of years ago, and they've got one. right? And so I do think some of that does fragment the grower's voice sometimes because we have so many those pieces. And then I look at that even from a testing perspective, because Kevin is right. Like, you got groups like Emily and Manitoba that are first-rate, organizations, right? And then there's U of C or U of S, sorry, is a really good organization as well from a testing. So is Lakeland, so is Lethbridge. But everything is a unique project to that entity. So there isn't anything that, could look at a more macro approach. So in the Brazil, I mean, you have Embrapa, right? And in the England, you have Agritech Group, which is a more consistent process. Because I do think all the pieces are here in Canada, but they are exceptionally fragmented. And I don't, and to me, we do have to think a little bit harder how we move away from projects to more significant strategic initiatives that go beyond a province, but probably go across the country or at least the prairies, and then think about how you fund and support those in a consistent and similar way. Because, we like Emily is easy to work with, but we don't really have funding that we can just do both. And we're a college and they're not. So it's not like you got funding pieces that work that way. We do lots of work with ARDAR, but ARDAR is an Alberta organization, right? So like we need some of those more national, and it's more about process and think it's not about the resources. It's more about the processes and the fact that we are right now exceptionally fragmented, not just by the provinces, but by organizations as well.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Kevin, one of the recommendations was to have like a national farmer innovation network. A formal group of farmers willing to, put their hand up and say, "Hey, I'll test. I'll give some feedback on some of these new technologies." Do you see that fit for you, or do you think there's an appetite for that out there?
Yeah, I think to a degree there are already a lot of leaders in innovation across Canada. I think some organization could bring them all together to make a national network. I believe there could be some interest from farmers to see other farmers using the tech and proving its function before others necessarily go and invest.
Yeah.
Third party research, be it by a university or college like Olds, that I think that holds a lot more weight for a lot of farmers, especially, I mean, even myself, where you don't necessarily want, a biased opinion on some of the tech, but having having something national could really maybe even simplify some of the innovation and stop some of the repetitive research that might happen across the country.
Yeah, repetitive research as if we're doing a little bit of that. That is definitely a real thing. Dave, accelerators are often asked to kind of connect these dots for the innovator, but can they realistically fill that matchmaking role alone between innovator and farmer / tester, or do we need a new kind of public-private bridge organization?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of both. I think regionally or provincially, some of them are able to do that because the size of the sector and the size of the network is not such that they cannot have connections into those various organizations. But as soon as you step outside of that, it becomes problematic. I may be able to corral the right kind of resources. If I have a technology I'm going to apply to the pork industry and it's going to go to pork farmers and I happen to be located in Manitoba, that's great. The resources are there. But as soon as I want to get into Ontario and Quebec, all of a sudden I may hit a brick wall. So there is that opportunity to augment what goes on regionally and provincially with a national organization whose job is not to handhold each entrepreneur, but whose job it is to make sure those connections are there. One of the things that Agriculture Agri-Food Canada had asked us to do, and we're still working on it, is providing what they call an online ecosystem map. So that if I'm an entrepreneur or a farmer or any part of the ecosystem in one location in Canada, I can go onto that ecosystem map and say, I need X. Mm. And that ecosystem map will now point to 6 or 7 different organizations or locations where I can get X. It would make it a lot easier than talking to 10 different people trying to figure out where I can get what I need.
Todd, one of the things that I heard loud and clear going across the country in these roundtables, when we look at collaboration, connectivity, and some of these regional fragmentation issues, and people identified we need ways to reward people or create the initiative or enable people to work cross jurisdiction. But I didn't hear a lot of solutions in terms of how we would actually reward people to do that. That is kind of a missing part of this.
It is. And I think it's structural, Shaun, right? Because again, we have on almost purpose divided ourselves into those, as you say, 11 different provinces, and the territories is included in that, right? And that is how structurally we are set up, and it's also how we fund. Even a lot of the funders will break themselves up by province. Like Prairies Canada is a core provider for ourselves, but it's a different person in Saskatchewan, it's a different person in Manitoba, right? And it's just how we are structured. And that's not, and what I find interesting, like, and you, Shaun, my background. I mean, I used to work for Syngenta, right? When I was a portfolio manager for North America, I never looked at a provincial map. I looked at an agronomic map and I looked at jurisdictions from that perspective, right? So the prairies was probably the smallest unit I would look at when I was thinking about bringing a product to market. But that is not how we are structured or how we are set up. And I think that's the challenge. So this is a very much a structural piece. Again, I think the assets and the people and the knowledge are here, but it is structurally how we are set up that makes this very difficult to do.
Yeah, well put. Well, let's talk about policy red tape and what I would call the slow lane at times. And we're going to have a whole episode on regulatory. And our couple guests that are going to join Dave and I for that are fired up about that topic very much. So if you're going to tune in for that. But Dave, when we look at regulatory, how big of a drag is Canada's regulatory system on commercializing ag tech? And where is that? Where are we relative to some of our global peers?
Well, it is a huge impediment for early stage startups and even scale ups to get their products into the marketplace in Canada. Most of them end up going south into the United States, where they can get regulatory approvals typically much faster. And if you're able to get, for example, a regulatory approval in California, then you've pretty much automatically got regulatory approval in the other 49 states. And so it's just much easier. And one of the entrepreneurs that we had in the roundtables talked about how he's been able to tap into various forms of government funding for his innovative projects. And as a result of receiving that government funding, he automatically went to the United States and started selling his products in the United States. And so the argument is that the Canadian government is paying him to sell his products in the United States, which is not what it's meant to be. So one of the things that we would love to see is that the regulatory entities in Canada become part of the commercialization process rather than being out on the outside, raising issues as to why they can't do certain things.
Now, Kevin, from your perspective as a farmer and from the producer organization standpoint, and if they're different, let us know, but what are some regulatory changes that you think could immediately speed up innovation or adoption on farms in Manitoba or beyond?
Yeah, I think there's lots of examples where things slow down when it comes to government and getting things regulated or applied. I'd probably throw an example like spraying with drones and how Canada's sort of dragging its feet. We don't technically really have any registered chemicals that are legal to apply, and yet drones are out there. They're being used.
I saw a billboard on the weekend. Somebody advertising, spray with our drones. Like, I saw a billboard of it.
Yeah, it's crazy, right? Because technically it's totally illegal, but here we are, right? And so that's just one example where it's like, okay, can we just move this along quicker to sort of catch up to the technology? Where, as an organization, I think we're constantly in conversation with both the government of Manitoba and nationally, federally, I should say, that just to help reduce the red tape and speed up some of the processes to get to get things moving quickly and just that move from research to policy and reducing that red tape regulations. And I think it would just really speed up the adoption process with a lot of these technologies and innovations.
Yeah, Todd, is there a way that colleges or you got a lot of experience with farm organizations, how they could collaborate to streamline the approval of some of these new innovations on farm?
Yeah, and some of these policies are national. Some of them are more local in general, right? But I do think we should also think about other jurisdictions. To Kevin's point, like a drone, like that work has been done in the U.S. and it's been done in Europe. And when you have multiple jurisdictions that now have something approved, can we not have potentially a fast track for here in Canada? Like those are some of the things that I hear discussed. I Renat Weller, she's the dean and professor at the U of C. She runs the veterinary program there, right? And she's from Germany. She's surprised at the regulatory environment here in Canada. So when a European tells me they are worried it tells me we have a very significant regulatory system, right?
Mm.
But even there too, you hear things like, for example, a processing plant may get built in a jurisdiction, not because it's the right jurisdiction for where the crop is, but it's because of red tape. Like that tells you those are things that are causing issues, right? So there's definitely opportunity there. I do think, I think like it's not perfect, RDR. I think some of the theory behind RDR is right, where you've got a bit of some grower pieces there as well. And I do think we have to also think about the difference between product development and market development. So back again, my time at Syngenta, I would have all kinds of resources to think about when something was cooked, how it's been 2 years doing grower meetings, dealer meetings, getting trials out there to get that product into the market. It was already somewhat cooked, but getting to the farm at those later stages allowed us to validate. I do think that sometimes in ag tech, we push products too quick to the farm.
Yep.
And again, that hurts that product. So I think, you need product development really at a college or an institution that can fail. We shouldn't force a producer with opportunities to fail on their farm. They don't have time for that. But once that product is pretty much cooked, then I do think there should be resources. And right now, I don't know a lot of resources that are out there that allow us to put the same kind of validation that you're going to see on our research farm onto a producer farm, which means you're going to have to help out in project management. Because I can guarantee you, when Kevin's out there seeing that 7,000 acres, he doesn't have a whole bunch of time to reset his settings for that 20 acres you kind of want to play with. So, but that's where we're missing that link between the research side, which I say is product development, to now moving to market development. And that's where I think there could be a really strong collaboration with grower associations as well, where that's where we should be engaging the farmer is market development, not product development.
There is probably a whole plethora of really good innovations, great ideas that self-inflicted wound, unforced error, came to market too quickly for whatever reasons. There's a lot of, the financing, where you're getting your money from can push you in that direction. Whatever reason, whatever got you to that point.
Yeah.
With the attitude of because in the consumer market, there's a lot of we'll get it out there and they'll provide us with feedback.
Exactly. Well, it's an agile development system.
Exactly.
But the agile development system is a really constant, ongoing. Again, farmers it's a season. It's a long
one turn.
Yeah.
Doesn't work. Except in the livestock example where, every day in the barn can be this.
And the dairy or something you can play with. But even there too, do you want to put risk into a commercial operation? And so I know in some cases, now, maybe like when you get to the size of a minette, when you've got, that size and you're at 200, whatever, there's 250,000 acres they are today, maybe they are big enough to start creating their own research and development engine. But that right now is a unique entity, right? And maybe farmers will get big enough, Shaun, that they will start getting to that point. And again, my experience at Farmers Edge, we ran into some organizations like that in Brazil and in Eastern Europe that are really that size and scale. But today, that's not the norm.
Yeah.
And that's, again, where I do see this need for a national group that can do this across the country.
Hey, Dave, hop in here.
Yeah, sure. two things that come to my mind as I listen to Todd and Kevin. The regulatory issue has two sides to it, in my view. Side number one is the companies that are trying to help these innovations get to marketplace, for the most part, do not have the regulatory expertise. So they walk around it. They try not to get too involved in the regulatory side. And on the other side, you have the regulatory agencies, which are typically passive. And Todd was talking about Europe and how if you're trying to bring something to market in Europe, the regulatory agency is part of your team. They are facilitating what needs to take place rather than sitting back and reacting and being passive. And so if we solve two problems in the next little while by saying we need to put more regulatory expertise into the ecosystem so that you can help these companies and help the farmers. And number two, we need to get the regulatory agencies engaged, make them part of the process. There's an old saying that you're either part of the problem or you're part of the solution. And we need to make them part of the solution.
So, Dave, one of the challenges there, though, is so you're burning through cash, right? You've got it, and Todd, you've worked in this world where like you're in a cash burn, and what happens is to say like, okay, you need to hire a regulatory consultant to help you get through some of the hurdles you may need to get through in some of those hoops in a year or 2 years. That can be difficult too, because you're like, oh man, we'll worry about that when we get there. We got to hit some of our revenue. So all your focus becomes on things to get you as a startup to get you through tomorrow, as opposed to something you may need 3 years out. So it can be a real challenge.
Yeah, and I'm aware of at least one software system which is known as a regulatory navigator. So,
that sounds like fun.
Oh, yeah. So that the entrepreneurs can go in at a very early stage and say, I'm looking at developing such and such. And by answering questions, it takes them through a regulatory pathway. So it doesn't solve the problem of having to spend a lot of money at some point, but at least it prepares them down the road. So they may be doing regulatory a year from now or a year and a half from now.
So, Todd, I'll start with you. Let's look at some of the funding programs and making sure that some of the techs are fit for the purpose and they're actually solving a problem. When we look at it from a government funding perspective and some of the programming that is out there, does it actually reflect how the agri-food business cycle works in most cases, or is there like a square peg round hole thing happening here where we're trying to, oh, hey, you're an innovator at this size, this scale, you've tested here. Oh, maybe you were doing some stuff with Olds College and that just means you go in this direction. It actually could be like, that's not a very good fit. How would you describe some of the mix matching that goes on?
So I think, Shaun, we're in a really interesting stage right now because, I would still argue, and I say this fairly often, when we think about agriculture and primary production, it's about ingredient manufacturing for the most part. There's usually 2 or 3 other processing sides that's coming down the piece. And so you are really kind of looking at efficiency and scale, right? When you look at food, you tend to look at experience and you look at kind of the end use product. And so when I look at a lot of policy today, it is being more and more influenced by that food side. And so our research and our dollars tend to focus what that's looking for. Now, they're not really in conflict, but you're correct in saying, square peg round hole, right? So, well, we maybe want to look at issues around environment and carbon to make sure that we are lining up to a national policy or things that are coming down the pipe. That does not necessarily mean that we are not focusing on efficiency, but we're getting the funding because of a perspective that's a little bit different than what we actually may need from a primary production perspective.
Yep.
And so, that's a bit of a challenge too. And then to add on to that, it is very project specific. And again, just because of the nature of our ecosystem, and our funders are funders, not necessarily strategic. They're not strategic in nature, i.e. strategically we need to focus in on a new hybrid. Strategically, we need to focus in on making sure our genetic pool does not shrink in hogs or chickens, right? We don't go down that path. We instead, enable a lot of projects all over the place. And what it means is a lot of little things and no one big thing because it's not coordinated. But that's the nature of funding today. It's very project oriented, not program specific. And so again, sometimes I think we're missing those big national things that we need to, and we need to fund a program, which means multi-year. Projects are great, but that today is almost how most all funding is done is through individual project, and it comes from every individual entity versus one larger strategic approach. So that challenge between, I would say, urban and rural, or farm and fork, doesn't necessarily all come together. And then the fact that we are very disparate in terms of where our funding requests come from mean that we're not really strategic. Like Shaun, again, I'm going off a little bit out here, but I don't know if we could create a canola today in Canada.
Whoa, really?
I just don't know if
Todd, that's a statement.
I know that, but honestly, you think you think about some of those entrepreneurial things that come through, like an air seeder or some things like that. They were really dependent upon a really cool entrepreneur or someone in Saskatchewan or someone, right? But I don't know if we have the ecosystem that would actually deliver large, significant movement because we are so fragmented and our approach is so project centered.
Okay, so is that also one thing? So correct me if I'm wrong here, but I'm going to tie in something I heard a lot through the roundtables in regards to the project funding is also the fact there's a time stamp to it where it's like 5 years.
Well, you're lucky. Most often 2-3 years. 3 years is probably more likely your funding timelines.
That's not helpful either. Now, so let's just, and Dave, I'm going to get back to you. I just want to follow this thread for a second. What was different about when we invented canola? It happened over a period of time and some real commitment. But what was different at that time then? What allowed that to happen? What did we do then that we're not doing now?
I honestly think we would have had a much more national framework for a lot of institutions and way we went. We would have had more extension services connected to the farm. We shouldn't go. That's not the solution either to go backwards either. But just to give you an example, Shaun, some of my learnings here at Olds College. Olds College at one time was part of the Department of Agriculture. When people came and became deans at Olds College, they may have gone through a track where they actually went through extension services first and worked their way up through the farm and working with the farm, and then moved into Olds College and moved into research and become a dean. Today, that infrastructure does not exist, right? So we're not that integrated system anymore. And I don't care if we're talking about Alberta, Manitoba, or Saskatchewan. Those systems just don't exist. And I don't think we can go back to that, completely back to that. But we do need to think through, again, what those processes are that connect this. It's not about throwing a whole bunch more money at individual items anymore. I do think it's more about how we create a national framework.
Dave?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with Todd. And we've been struggling with the difference in focus between incremental innovation and innovation that's going to change the world, which is basically what canola did. And we know that the structure of the ecosystem, the funding of the ecosystem, is all conducive to incrementality. So if we're going to change that and be more strategic, then we need to change the funding system and we need to be more connected nationally to do that. I think those are two characteristics that could be changed again fairly readily. But again, one of the problems that we have is in this government funding that we talk about quite a bit. The provincial funding must be spent in the province, and you then cannot spend the money on outside resources. Right. It has to be spent within the province, which is counterintuitive if the best resources are located in some other province. So having a national capability to augment that funding could help bring everybody together, so that you now have provincial government, federal government, and then other sources of capital to move a project forward. It happens, but it happens with no degree of regularity currently.
Yeah. Kevin, I couldn't imagine, just using this example, think about the value that's been created on farms like yours across Western Canada and beyond our borders because of the innovation of canola. Like that's a
Yeah,
big statement.
it's incredible actually if you think about what canola is to Canada. And I guess my thoughts sort of go along with Todd and Dave, where I'm almost curious, sort of the what came first, chicken or the egg? Was it the openness of research that brought on canola, or was it sort of we have a problem and we need to solve this, and canola was the answer? I don't know enough actually, honestly, about my canola history to say were they looking for a solution to something, or was it something we kind of stumbled upon it, you know.
Well, I do know this. I heard this a lot through the different provinces is criticism of our current peanut butter approach, where we spread money over try to keep everybody, a lot of people happy by spreading the money over a very wide swath because we don't want to pick winners. And then the other thing that came with that, Dave, is I'm going to use a phrase. I'm not encouraging people to do this, but we don't kill enough kittens. That we don't actually say, you know what? We've tried. You've tried with your business, your innovation. The tech is wrong timing. Business plan doesn't work. Can't generate the revenue. We just, you know what? That maybe move on to the next idea. What we do in the peanut butter approach is we continue to just not give them the bad news and we keep them alive. I heard professional accelerator a couple times through the provinces, Dave.
Yeah. It comes back to something Todd said very early on today, and that is that we're all involved in economic development. And therefore, the mandates that we have and how we are measured is on economic development. Increases in employment, increases in investment, and most of those are done on a regional basis. You talk about the peanut butter, and yeah, we spread money around to try and satisfy municipalities and regions in the country and try and treat them with some degree of equality, which may not be the right decision, and often it is not the right decision. I think the other thing that comes to my mind is business acceleration in agriculture, is it really economic development, or is it something else? And maybe we should be calling it something else. So if we're going to talk about strategic projects and try to repeat as best we can the canola experience, I don't think that's going to happen through economic development.
Todd, I know you firmly believe, maybe I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I know you firmly believe this is a strategic industry in the country. So what needs to happen in order for it to reach that potential that everybody always talks about when it comes to innovation?
And maybe building on what Dave said there, and it's not, I don't, and again, Shaun, also, I'm an old marketer, right? Like in marketing products. Sometimes I find change management comes not because of the panacea or the good, but because of the bad. And unfortunately, that's what tends to drive change more often, right? So we had that ICA conference at Food and Forum, which we were talking about here right earlier, and a couple things stood out to me in those things. So one, 98% of the people that were in that meeting and online had this food security perspective, and that global trade is important, and you're good at beef and we're good at pineapples, so let's go back and forth mentality, right? But on the end of the last day, the person from the US referenced the fact that her boss's boss, and she talked about how, hey, in 2004, there was a $4.3 billion deficit between Mexico and the US, and now there's an $18.5 billion deficit. And in Canada, 2004, you had a $300 million deficit, and now you have a $12.7 billion deficit. You need to right size that. It was not a cooperative message. It was not a collaborative message. And so that worries me a little bit, that some of those foundational things that we actually created food security on are breaking down today, right? And then another speaker reminded us that, hey, the French Revolution wasn't done because they didn't like the king. It was because people were hungry. That was that's what really drove that. It wasn't that the peasants didn't like the king. They were hungry. And part of me worries that we are moving into an area where food security could become a real issue. And we've been complacent because it hasn't been a real issue. And so to Dave's point, it may not be economic development. It may be food security at the end of the day that drives these changes. And then the other thing I heard this week or last week in that conference, we're also going to have to be really nervous. They're trying to ask now from 2 to 5% for defense spending. That's going to have to come from somewhere.
Yep.
And a lot of people are talking about that ag may be one of those areas that are going to get hit because we have to spend more money on defense. And so this issue may get even that much more harder to do in the next little while.
You know, Kevin, one of the things that we've seen with some of our market research is that farmers are optimistic. You know, there is some things to be concerned about in 2025 and beyond. But one of the things that farmers are optimistic about is their ability to produce more with less, their ability to find efficiencies. One of the way you do that is through implementing innovations on the farm. This whole space, it's not something that farmers naturally think about the policies around it, but boy, the practical and the usage side of it, they're living it every single day.
Yeah, it's definitely a challenge. I think we all take it to be a challenge, but it is something that we focus on, almost daily. How to do more with less. And I know I'm sure the research people in colleges and everybody else is always the same way too, how to do more with less. But it's a reality. It's a reality for everybody. And heck, like I sort of come back to what I said earlier, there has to be an ROI. There has to be something tangible to the innovation to make it worthwhile for us. But yeah.
Dave, I'll give you the final call to action here.
Well, I guess one of the things that has been mentioned, I think, twice in this podcast today was, should Canada have an overarching national entity that does something and helps coordinate and what have you? If you are in the life sciences, pharma, or medical space, the one organization you're going to gravitate to is the MARS organization in downtown Toronto, which stands for Medical and Related Science. And it's a wonderful, very expensive center. It's got pharmaceutical companies in it. It's got investors and so on and so forth. And they aren't there to replace what goes on locally, but they are there to help move something forward and get it into the marketplace as quickly and efficiently as possible. So my question to Todd and to Kevin is, should something like that be created in Canada? And if it was, what should it do?
Guys.
You want to go first, Kev?
I can try, yeah. I do. I think there could be a benefit to a national organization to overlook innovations and like I said earlier, I think it could take out some of the redundancy in research and ways to get things to market. It could make things more efficient, and I think it's important to, like Shaun mentioned earlier, sort of to maybe possibly weed out some of those projects that may hold us back and hinder us from moving forward with the best and most hopeful projects. But yeah, I would be I'd be interested to see what a national organization like that could look like.
And then Bill, on that, I mean, I would see an organization that would set, like, what are those core priorities that we have to look at, across the country, fund it at a national level, but also ask for a consistent process and make that work as well. So, if we're going to measure something at Olds, well, measure it the same way at Emily and make sure that we're going to the same goal and the same end piece, right? Create that consistency so that when we measure this, we measure the same thing across, and we have those goals the same as well. So that's where I would look at is it would literally kind of tie everybody together. And it should also, Dave, in my mind, not just fund colleges, but things that can deliver the results, right? So to your point, maybe it is at an Olds college, maybe it's at a Haggerty farm in Ontario, maybe it is at University of Guelph, but they've got that ability to look at it much more broader and leverage all the resources in a consistent way, not by province or by type.
Great stuff. Well, awesome discussion here today, everybody. Really appreciate the participation. And Dave, really look forward to the next episode here as we dive into these roundtables with Bioenterprise and in this national call to action.
Yeah, it's going to be quite a journey. I'm looking forward to it.
Hey, Kevin, thanks a lot for joining us.
You're welcome. Thanks for the invite today.
Yeah, and Todd, thanks so much.
Yeah, thanks, guys.